documenting is allowing something to take place in front of a narrow field, and sort of capturing the movement or the experience or the emotion of that, to sort of shift this idea of what documentary filmmaking is, which is similar, right? It's about this narrow field, but your field allows for the lens to be the documenter and maybe not always necessarily listening for the narrative, which is really compelling, but also a relief. That what I experienced watching America was that I didn't have to learn in a conventional way about what it is that you were expressing. My learning was intrinsic. I could imprint my experience with your experience and then have a mutual kind of intersection understanding of what you were doing. And that leads me to my next question, which is, just to take a detour before we come back to the actual films that you've made. We're watching right now a lot of documenting of people's experiences in the news media. Once again, there's a round of people's untimely deaths, and then there's another documenting of people's expression of fear and isolation and anger because of what's happening. I'm curious your response to that as a filmmaker, but also as a human being and a maker of things at this time, especially since we're all still supposed to be glued to our spaces, responding to each other in these little boxes, and that's a kind of outward space of response.
Yeah. Gosh, it's so funny you asked this question, because I was just looking at the news this morning. I was like, how am I going to do this today? Like, I just can't even.
Exactly what I felt today too. So yes, that's why I'm asking. I'm so glad you said it. What a relief.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. There's two ways of answering that question. I think the first is that I personally have a really hard time with violence, with the repetition of violent imagery. And it's a complicated thing, because as an artist, as a person who's making things, who's trying to contribute to the world, I would never want to set rules for what is the most effective in creating change. I think that those violent images are very necessary for a lot of people, and for a lot of different reasons. I think in my work, I try to grapple with the same questions and the same issues from a spectrum of beauty, from the belief that beauty and love and joy and pleasure can be just as radical in creating change. Yeah. And there was this is maybe a bit of a tangent, but I was watching this video of the CNN reporter when he was getting arrested. And it's such a profound moment, because you go through so many different stages of reaction as you're watching that. For me, I was at first really confused and frustrated as to why no one else on the reporter's team was stepping in and helping him. But then you start to see one by one, they all start to get arrested. And then I became extremely thankful for the camera person who did not cut the camera and allowed it to be live. And that kind of in and of itself in this present moment was a very radical thing to do, to not cut off the violence, actually. It's part of, from my understanding, of what I think created protest during the Vietnam War. It was one of the few moments where you actually saw what was going on. And then, my generation, and I think our generation is been really used to the backdrop, the green screen. And the green screen wasn't there, and the camera kept rolling, and it was really powerful. And it brought so many questions into the role of journalism, to the role of war photography in those critical moments, and was actually really inspiring.
It's interesting about that, because I'm actually a Gen Xer, and so I have one foot in my understanding of what it was like before I experienced the transition of capture and lens and image, and then where we are now, which means that I live in this constant duality where my reaction is always hearkening back to what it was before, you know, when I was a child in the 70s. And then this idea about what it became while I was studying. I went to Cal Arts for my graduate degree, and what I was studying and what image meant then and then now, and how to capture. I also spent a stint working at Third World Newsreel, which spent some time capturing a lot of that footage from protest during the 60s. And I have an intimate relationship with, like, I guess an emotional relationship with that work and what it does. Thank you for responding, because I was, you know, I was thinking today how difficult it is to move through the work that I have to do with that on my back. And I can't imagine that you are also moving through it without that same weight on your back. So to make space for it and acknowledge that is, I was like, I have to do that today.
Yeah, thank you.
With Garrett, I have to make sure that we've said it out loud. This is hard.
Yeah.
And it's hard to act like it's normal.